Video games have the power to tell interesting, deep, fascinating stories, or challenge us and push our limits with certain gameplay mechanics, or just makes us fascinated with the possibilities of current day technology. And I love that gaming does that. But while I love gaming for doing something like that, sometimes I just don't want that. Instead, sometimes my monkey brain just wants to smash large groups of faceless goons into even bigger, meaningless, yet dopamine creating numbers without thinking. And preferably not just once, but dozens of times in dozens of hours until my monkey brain goes completely numb. And I found the perfect game who could offer me that experience. Recently, I reviewed a crossover game that involved Fire Emblem. There, I spoke about getting into the series, but that I was not ready for such commitment yet. But ever since Fire Emblem Engaged came out, a good friend of mine has been actively putting Fire Emblem into my mind, and well, here we are. Fire Emblem Three Hopes. It's not a full commitment yet, but it's definitely a small, yet slightly different taste of the Fire Emblem series. Fire Emblem Three Hopes is an alternative story set in the same medieval universe as Fire Emblem Three Houses. In the land of Fotland, conflict is slowly rising as ambitions of nobles and leaders grow out of hand, while at the same time invisible strings are being pulled by a secret organization. In all of this, you play as a mercenary who possesses a mysterious power and is set on a quest to avenge his or her old mercenary band. This quest eventually leads you to be recruited by one of the three factions of Fotland to fight alongside them in the upcoming conflict. The story and world here in Three Hopes is to a degree what you should expect from a medieval setting. Nobles and knights, kings and queens, politics, conflicts and betrayal over land and power. And on top of that, there's a small layer of magical elements and even some mythical creatures. But all in all, Three Hopes stays very simple and straightforward. And maybe even too straightforward on the story side of things. At the start of the game, the potential this story has is huge. A large stage is set for the conflict, and you even get to pick who your main character is going to be on that stage. But you also get to pick who your rival is going to be, and probably the most interesting thing you get to choose is which faction you will be joining in this conflict. That last choice, by the way, is very easily made. I mean, the Holy Kingdom of Faragus and the Leicester Alliance are great and all, but the Adristian Empire is the only real option here. Why? Well, their main color is red, their symbol is a two-headed eagle, their leader is an emperor, and said emperor scores very high on the waifu skill. But don't let her waifu rating fool you, cause she is a ruthless conqueror. But all jokes aside, the world, story and choices the game offers at the beginning are great on paper. In practice, the choices you make and the story you follow is rather disappointing. Many things get started and build up, like the factions, the War of Fotland, your own character and the mysterious powers you possess, and your rival, and even more than that, but barely any of that is properly worked on, and gets resolved very fast, clumsy, and just fizzles out in the end. I was especially disappointed by how I had to choose the faction I wanted to join, which again is the most important choice you make in this game as it affects your complete playthrough. But prior to this important choice, you do not get to know these characters and their ideals as leaders. Nor did I really get a feeling for their faction and its histories and goals either, boiling this important choice down to what I like aesthetically than anything else. At first I thought it was nice that the world kept things rather straightforward and simple, as the conflict introduced and the choices that were offered already had plenty of depth and interesting elements. Having an actual deep world and lore could ruin things here, and making it an overly complicated, convoluted mess. But as the story went on and I made my choices, the disappointment grew, as it all seemed to slowly fall apart like loose sand, wasting the simple but good stage the world building created. But it did not fall apart completely, as there was one thing that kept the game story-wise together. In between story moments you have the freedom to do a couple of things. One of them is interacting and establishing relations with other characters. As you play the game, you gain affinity with these characters, and when it reaches a certain level, you unlock dialogue moments with them. And these moments are great! Every character has a side story that you can unlock, and most of them are interesting or just fun. Not only do you get to know the characters a little bit better, but their topics and overall dialogue is very lighthearted and carefree. And the cast of characters is very diverse and fit perfectly in this setting. You got the typical over-the-top nobleman, you got a foreign assassin, a strong-minded emperor, but also something as simple as an opera singer or a girl that is anxious for going outside. Fire Emblem Three Hopes has a large quantity of characters, yet manages not to suffer because of that. In fact, it even manages to elevate exploring characters, as not only many of them have small side stories amongst each other, but increasing affinity with them can be done via a large variety of activities. The side stories amongst characters themselves is definitely a fun idea, as it makes it feel like characters live and interact outside of your main character's point of view. Some characters only get in specific situations or have a certain history with one another, making the exploration also feel very natural and deep at the same time, even though most of these side stories are only told in 2 to 3 moments of dialogue. And again, increasing affinity levels with the characters, be it amongst themselves or solely with the main character, is not a big hassle. In fact, it felt very rewarding and accessible, as there are various of ways to do so. Most obviously, of course, is fighting together on the battlefield, but you can also increase affinity via small talk, doing chores, cooking and eating dinner together, training or going to special locations on the mission map, exploration, and giving gifts based on their likes and dislikes. These activities even have a further rippling effect when it comes to being rewarding. When doing these activities, you also gain buffs, renown points, and class XP, which heavily improves your combat capabilities. Now, when it comes to combat, Three Hopes becomes the odd one out in this series, as it's a Muso game, or as most people call it more often, a Warriors game. Warrior games are famous or infamous for being more or less mindless hack and slash games, where you destroy thousands of faceless goons while action is dialed up to 11. The gameplay loop literally boils down to killing a couple of hundred enemies, go to a base or objective, kill some generals or commanders, or complete the set objective alongside killing another 100 enemies, and preferably you build up and use your special move as fast as possible so you get even more kills in before you get to the next base or objective. And that's it. Rinse and repeat all day long. Now, I love this kind of gameplay. Once a while, cause it's just mindless fun, and sometimes mindless fun is good fun. And while the formula is very simple, there are some interesting variations of the Warriors formula out there, and Three Hopes is kinda one of those interesting variations. Originally, Fire Emblem is a turn-based strategy game where there is a big focus on a class system. Each of them has their advantages and disadvantages against other classes, and it's up to you to tactically exploit them and obtain victory. And it's this exact system that is taken from the Fire Emblem series and thrown here right into the Warriors gameplay. Which is interesting to say the least, but does not always work. In early game, this system is the most noticeable and adds a fun layer to the Warriors gameplay. For example, if you put archers against Pegasus Knights, they will deal more damage, and you are able to exploit the stagger system to the fullest, as archers are in the advantage against Pegasus Knights. But if you are in disadvantage, then staggering the enemy will be a lot harder, and you will take significantly more damage, risking defeat. It's therefore important that you upgrade and train all your units properly across the board, so that whenever this situation calls for it, you have the best counter units to your disposal. To further emulate the tactical gameplay of the Fire Emblem series, there's even a tactical map, where you get to command your units to attack certain targets or bases like a Grand Commander. It's not a lot, but it works better than expected, and it's just a fun, nice nod to the original gameplay of Fire Emblem. However, in the end, this is still a Warriors game. No matter how many tactical elements you copy from Fire Emblem, numbers will still matter the most. So as you progress and the main team becomes stronger and stronger, the weight of their numbers overrules this whole class system. Even when you get into a situation where the enemy has an advantage over you in terms of unit, you can still easily delete them as long as your numbers are just much higher than your opponent. In this same situation, you also skip the stagger system altogether and ignore the risk of taking high damage, as your defense and your HP can easily tank it. Overall, it's a shame that it happens, because it ruins the fun tactical system, but it also ruins classic mode. It's a permadeath mode that is also part of the Fire Emblem series for a while now. And I turned it on with the hopes that it would make things more risky and make me pay more attention to my actions on the battlefield. But as soon as I outweighed the enemy's numbers, I never feared of losing one of my units permanently. In fact, in my 40 hours of playing this game, I never lost a single one of them. Though I'm going to be fair, I kinda expected this to happen from the start. As again, this is a Warriors game. The genre is quite known for making the same mistakes again and again, and this is just one of them. Another common mistake Warrior games make is that the combat gets mundane rather quickly. Some of them manage to put that moment that it gets mundane far into your playthrough, but unfortunately Three Hopes is not one of them. In fact, it makes this mistake far quicker than I expected. In a game like Hyrule Warriors, the constant switching between characters also meant a constant switch in fighting styles. This divvied up the gameplay enough to keep the mundane feeling at bay for a long time. And they made an attempt to do something similar here via the class system. Theoretically, you should be changing and evolving your class as you progress, but maxing out the preferable class for each character is far too easy. Therefore, you get stuck on using certain classes for the longest periods of time. On top of that, the classes themselves don't play and feel that different from one another. You could aim to max out all classes that a character can be, but outside of weapon proficiencies and some skills, I saw little to no use doing so. Switching characters and classes to have an advantage in battle is a nice idea, and I try to do it as much as possible. But the same or even a better effect could be achieved with less effort, and that was just increasing their level. And at some point that just happened automatically as well. Now, I did consider nerfing myself, forcing to play only with classes that have an advantage and keeping all my characters' level as low as possible. But that ultimately became an annoyance and took away the remaining fun that the combat did have. The way Three Hopes divides its gameplay loop is really clever. The battles themselves are fairly standard for Warriors games, but what I absolutely loved was that each chapter had multiple smaller regional battles, giving you the choice which battle you want to fight and which you don't. You can't just rush straight forward to the main mission, or you could do every side mission on the map, which of course rewarded you with unit XP, items, weapons, and upgrade materials for your camp. Especially the latter one felt really rewarding, as that meant not only better upgrades and items for my units, but also more interaction points that I could spend on my characters. These missions also don't take too long. The main missions take up to 10 to 20 minutes, again the standard in warrior battles. But these side missions were bite-sized, taking only 4 to 7 minutes each. And they all came with different objectives, which kept things interesting and fun, as you never knew what was coming up or what fun rules some missions contained. Having these smaller missions also meant that you can create a nice balance between the things you're doing, avoiding that you get burned out on the battles alone. Had enough of them? Go on an expedition with a character. Upgrade your camp or cook some food and check your equipment. The game unfortunately does not have a full conquest map or anything, where the whole map was filled with these weird missions and where the developers could go all out with their weird mission requirements or unique rewards. Because that's also something that's missing in this game, customization. What I really enjoyed in Warriors games is grinding for new skins, weapons and collectibles, and none of them are here. You can select the school uniform or the class-specific skin that you unlock with certain classes, but that is really it. Fire Emblem Three Hopes it's an alright game. Early game in particular is a lot of fun. The story isn't much and doesn't deliver on what it builds up, and the choices you make feel very detached from it. The characters and interactions with them, on the other hand, is fantastic. On that end, I have nothing to complain about, other than that their side stories show how weak the main story is. Interactions with characters felt very rewarding and was just fun and clever, just as clever as the gameplay loop is. You get to pick what you want to do, and if you balance things out well enough, you won't burn yourself out completely. But the risk is still there, and for many I would say it's guaranteed to be happening at some point in your playthrough, as the combat tries to use a lot of elements from Fire Emblem, but none of them are able to escape or overpower the original Warriors formula. For me, the combat started to feel mundane and I got a little bit burned out roughly 25 hours into my playthrough. But I was fine with that, as again, I want this experience, and to a degree, I like this kind of experience. To avoid this, you could try to nerf yourself and force playing different classes constantly to extend the fun time, but there's only little you can do. A playthrough takes roughly 40 to 45 hours, and at some point you will feel the fatigue that every Warriors game comes with. Ultimately, I do find it a shame that despite its ideas and effort, the elements taken from Fire Emblem Three Houses didn't make a difference. Often I thought about how great it would be if the effects were heavier or that there was a better balance between stats and those gameplay elements. I know that goes a bit against what a Warriors game should be, but still, a man can hope once a while. Funny enough, Fire Emblem Three Hopes gave a fairly similar feeling as Bladestorm Nightmare did. That game has a similar setting and some similar gameplay mechanics as well, but it was also packed with great ideas that changed the Warriors formula immensely. But just like Bladestorm Nightmare, Fire Emblem Three Hopes unfortunately was not strong enough or implemented those ideas to carry it beyond just being interesting ideas.